Minute 23.
Mrs. White, you've been paying our friend the blackmailer ever since your husband died under, shall we say, mysterious circumstances.
Why is that funny?
I see. That's why he was lying on his back in his coffin.
I didn't kill him.
Then why are you paying the blackmailer?
I don't want a scandal, do I? We had had a very humiliating public confrontation. He was deranged. He was lunatic. He didn't actually seem to like me very much. He had threatened to kill me in public.
Why would he want to kill you in public?
I think she meant he threatened in public to kill her.
Was that his final word on the matter?
Being killed is pretty final, wouldn't you say?
And yet he was the one who died, not you, Mrs. White, not you.
What did he do for a living?
He was a scientist. Nuclear physics.
What was he like?
He was always a rather stupidly optimistic man. I mean, I'm afraid it came as a great shock to him when he died, but he was found dead at home. His head had been cut off.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Clue the Movie Podcast, where we break down the 1985 cult classic Clue 1 minute at a time. We're on minute 23. My name is Brad Gilmore, joined as always by Jeff Smith. And Jeff, you did your homework this time. You were ready.
This one time, yeah.
This is the second time you've seen this minute now. Minute 23. Great.
Yeah.
You know what? I did not realize how many great kind of iconic line, or like, I guess iconic might not be the right word, but like memorable moments would be from this 1 minute.
Just in that 1 minute, that is Madeline. Well, it's Madeline Kahn's minute, but Tim Curry with his eyeballs just doing a lot of the acting of that scene. First off, the eye roll that he gives Miss Scarlet when she says, "Why would you want to kill him in public?" Or "Why would he want to kill you in public?" And then when he goes, "But he was the one who died, Mrs. White, not you," and just it's what, yeah, Brad's doing it right now if you're listening, and it's really good. This is when I did my homework and watched this scene. I thought, well, this is just Madeline Kahn. This is that His Girl Friday dialogue, and it's all about Mrs. White's very dark backstory.
Well, first of all, going back to Tim Curry, because the minute starts with Mrs. Well, actually, technically, the minute starts with Colonel Mustard ending his thing about my mommy and daddy.
I
made a lot of war.
Tim Curry, another great reaction shot. Yeah.
And then it ends with Mrs. White's kind of explanation of why she's being blackmailed. But I will say, going to Miss Scarlet, at first, like, this is the most excited I've ever seen somebody get on a joke, like getting a joke like 20 minutes later, right?
Yeah,
like,
she's got a very good memory. The setup did not go over her head. That she obviously was thinking about that for a while, that he just lies on his back all day. Because she did make a comment about that, saying, "Look, that's hard. Sounds like hard work to me." But for some reason, it stuck because she jumps on that immediately when she finds out that he's dead. Yeah, that's a good laugh. Excited. I don't think I've ever laughed at anything that hard in my life, or had such glee where she has to throw her head back. Yeah, I would love to be able to impersonate it, but it's just, that's pure Leslie Ann Warren laugh. So good.
And again, the dialogue and the zippiness, as we've talked about from almost minute one, when we first started seeing the characters. I love when Mrs. White says, "He threatened to kill me in public," and then she said, "Why would he threaten to kill you in public?" And then Tim Curry,
"Why would he want to kill you in public?"
Why would he want to kill you in public? And he said, "I think that he threatened in public to kill her."
Eye roll.
And there's a lot of this kind of stuff where it's just essentially the rule of three. Just she says it, she repeats it, then there's a correction on it, I guess. But it's essentially them saying the same line 3 times. Somewhat different, but it really works.
Yeah, and actually one of my favorite lines that does go by really fast is where she says that her ex-husband was a stupidly optimistic man. I'm afraid it came as a great shock to him when he died. And I don't know if I even got that line as a kid, but now that I hear it, I think that's just a hilarious observation. This is the kind of clip when I've done just to pass the time, I'll put on YouTube like each character's like greatest moments. And this is a very hard scene for Mrs. White because it's impossible to know where to stop. And the minute just decided for us today, but it's boom, boom, boom. And she just tops it and tops and tops it. And when we go into minute 24, where she's still going, it still goes on. It's probably going to be the next minute where she keeps going and topping herself on what happened to her husband's. And I think we cut off right here where his head had been cut off.
His head was cut off. So,
and yeah,
I mean, look, we've done this
She's
thing where
bad.
we've tried to rank, the evils of everyone. And so far, we've said that Professor Plum has the worst
Yeah.
offense, taking advantage of a female patient. But
sure.
now Mrs. White doesn't admit to doing what she's accused of doing because they had a big public breakup or what have you, is the reason she says she's
Right.
playing the blackmail. But I mean, she definitely killed him, right?
Well, it depends on now that we're hearing Mrs. White, and I know Professor Plum is very, very bad. That being said, Mrs. White has had affairs with, we'll get to that number later down, but she may not admit it, but of all of them, there's only one admitted killer so far, even though she says she admitted nothing. But allegedly, she has cut off someone's head for, I think, having an affair, which we'll find out. And in the next minute, we'll find out she cut off something else in the same swoop. So
Yes.
I don't know. It's tough to rank murder versus,
Right.
what Plum's all about. I don't know. They may be tied in certain circles, but I also, I don't know.
I mean, I
Mrs.
think
White is pretty cold about it.
it's pretty bad, man. Like, it's
It's
pretty
bad.
bad. That's a hard one to say. That I definitely think what Professor Plum did is the worst offense in a lot of ways. But I think murder just has to trump everything, right?
Yeah, I think
it's
you're
literally
right.
killing.
I think we've in this minute have turned the corner. And I think she is the worst. And also she's bad because she justifies what she does. She doesn't feel any guilt for it, as we'll find out in other minutes as well, that it's in her mind, they deserve it.
Yeah.
She's
Very
bad.
bad.
Maybe
Now,
you're right. I think Mrs. White goes to the top, which is hilarious because she's a lot of people's favorite character in Clue.
well, yeah. I mean, of course,
Madeline Kahn.
Yeah, it's Madeline Kahn. We had the legendary improv that we'll get to toward the end of the film. But going back to what she was saying, first of all, the head was cut off, and we'll find out more later. But have you ever met? Let me ask you this first: have you ever met a scientist of any kind,
A scientist? I don't think so. No.
or like even
Have
like a
you?
science? Well, yeah, like you rub elbows sometimes with somebody who's like, "Oh, I'm a biochemist." Well, see, I'm in Houston where we have a lot of space people, right? And we have the Johnson Space Center. So I live close to the Johnson Space Center. So I do meet some people who are scientists and literal rocket scientists and things of that nature. And although they're great people by and large, I would never categorize them as optimistic. Ever.
That's true, because they know too much.
They know so much. Ignorance is
smart.
bliss, and they are not ignorant.
Yeah.
They're very smart.
Yeah.
They're very aware. And like when you bring up any subject with one of these guys who I know, at least in the space world, it's always like, well, let me tell you all the horrific things about that subject. You know what I mean?
We're all
Like the
gonna die.
worst things that's going to keep you up at night. Your life is meaningless because of this, and I mean, they're not the most optimistic of people. So I would like to know. And the other thing is, this guy's a nuclear physicist. Her husband was somebody who's working on an atom bomb, that's going to kill civilizations of people.
Got a great attitude.
I mean, I don't know. Can you be that optimistic if you're working on something that's going to kill people?
She is not the most reliable narrator in that story, so who knows? I mean, again, she justifies, and she could see things completely different. And next to her, he probably seemed like he was an optimistic type. Like, I want to know how they ended up together in the first place. I mean, I can
Yeah.
understand some of the attraction to Mrs. White, and it's not conversational, I'm sure. And it's not just like she's fun to have dinner with. I mean, she's crazy, so we know.
It's interesting. I would like to know more about the physicist. Obviously, we can't have the conversation with him for obvious reasons. But
Yeah.
now that we're looking at it, though, when she drops the nuclear physicist element to it, and we
Yeah.
know we know everyone's in DC, and we're starting to hear a little bit more about maybe what they all potentially could have in common. I mean, is this the first thread that really just dropped regarding the nuclear element, or was there something with Colonel
Yeah.
Mustard?
No, it's basically her. Well, he's just a war criminal, but we don't know
Right.
anything about. I mean, he could just be. He's just a colonel.
Mhm.
But this is the first time we hear. I mean, it's the first time we hear about what Mrs. White's husband does, because up until this moment, she had said that he just laid around on his back all day and did nothing.
But okay,
So yeah, we're
again,
starting to get into that communism as a red herring.
because we've seen the McCarthyism stuff right on display
Yeah, on TV.
from the television. We're learning they're all politicians. Now, again, we look at this thing with literally the literal microscope and the magnifying glass, if you will. And from screenwriting, we talked a little bit about it. We've been reading this book, or I've been reading this book. You've already read the book, Save the Cat, and
Mm-hmm.
most of the time, if a screenplay is written effectively, there's not a lot of wasted dialogue, right?
Right.
Everything is kind of either setting something up or paying something off, furthering the story along in some way. It's
Yeah.
not just an offhandedness. Now, that might be different in like perhaps a Quentin Tarantino film or a Kevin Smith movie where there's more conversationally based about different things. But for the most part, scripts such as a Clue or a Back to the Future or Indiana Jones, like everything's going to further either character development, story, or set something up to pay something off later. Should we be paying attention to this moment when she mentions the nuclear physicist? Because she could have easily said he was a scientist, he had his head in the stars. I mean, there's so many things that she could have said regarding her husband. She specifically said nuclear physicist. Is that something that we as the audience should key up to and be like, oh, hey, okay, what does that mean? Why would that seem specific?
Yeah, I think it's the difference between this kind of a story and like a Back to the Future is it's a mystery. So mysteries tend to sometimes lead you down paths that go nowhere. And that's basically you're led to believe it all is going to lead to something that has to do with McCarthyism. It has to do with them being politicians. And really, in the end, spoiler everybody, it really has nothing to do with that. It's just good old fashioned blackmail for whoever the killer ends up being. And I think what it's doing, kind of setting up these really grand ideas, and then in the end, just goes, "That wasn't important." In the same way that last year's Glass Onion kind of did set up a lot of things, and then you find out no, it's just dumb. Spoiler on that too, but that's not that big a spoiler. Um, but yeah, it's kind of leading you in and out and in and out, and then goes nowhere.
Did you enjoy Glass Onion?
I loved it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Did
thought
you
it was
like it
great.
more
It
than
wasn't
Knives
a
Out?
no. I thought it was funnier than Knives Out. I was
Definitely
surprised how
funnier.
funny it was.
Mhm.
I really liked the pandemic stuff at the beginning. It was funny how we could be so nostalgic for something that just happened, but it seemed like so long ago. I thought the cast was fantastic. I thought the reveal of the mystery was not that surprising, but that's okay. But I really liked it. Did you enjoy it?
I did like it. I thought
Yeah,
that again, it was much funnier than its predecessor. Um,
yeah,
I felt as though, whereas in the first one, you knew what happened and you're kind of seeing everything fall out from that, I guess. Well,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying.
Hmm?
But this one, the mystery wasn't as mysterious. Like you almost
Right.
saw it coming from the beginning as to who the
Yeah.
big bad would be. And the other thing that I guess I didn't love about it, I did love the movie. I really liked the movie. Like, I mean, it's a solid 8, if not more, on a scale of
Okay.
10. I mean, it might be an 8.5, could get a 9, depending on. But I felt like there's a twist, and I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but there's a twist
Mhm.
with one of the characters that I felt is like the most convenient twist
Yeah.
in the history of cinema, and it's been done umpteenth times, from low budget soap operas to professional wrestling angles involving Hulk
That's
Hogan,
true.
and on.
To
So
referees. I remember
yes, who might?
Ted DiBiase
How
paid
much
for
was the plastic
somebody's
surgery, brother?
plastic surgery. That's one of my favorite things, even as a kid going, oh. No, I agree. And see the frustration in it, because I kind of felt like Rand Johnson is saying, if I acknowledge that it's dumb, it's okay, which is kind of a cheat. I agree. And then for the bad character to be so not smart that that person doesn't realize that someone that shouldn't be there is now there, and they just
Yeah,
kind of let it go and enjoy the rest of the weekend. If you've seen
very
Glass Onion,
strange.
folks, you know what we're talking about. But that being said, I thought it was enjoyable. I enjoyed it's definitely a time capsule of 2020, and I liked all the weird references to things that, like, from internet things to Google notifications for movies, because I like movies. What's his name? Dave Faustino,
Dave
not
Batista.
David Bautista. I was going to say David Faustino, but that's Bud Bundy for Made with Children. He's great.
He's very
He's
funny.
funny in it too. He's a good actor.
Yeah,
And I know he's from
honestly, I
your
actually
wonderful world of pro
he,
wrestling.
he's from my world of pro wrestling, and honestly, I had this conversation recently. I think of all wrestlers turned actors, he's actually the best actor of
Hmm.
wrestlers turned actors. I mean, The Rock is great, but he kind of plays The Rock in every movie.
He still plays
John
that
Cena's
wrestler character,
John Cena, kind of the similar thing. He's very funny. John Cena can be very funny if you look at stuff like
very good
Trainwreck.
in Trainwreck. Yeah, I thought he was
Yeah,
funny, and he's willing to do a lot to be for a joke, which is like the anti, like, Steven Seagal or that type of person that
right.
doesn't want to look ridiculous.
And then Hulk Hogan's
Excuse me.
movies were over the top and cheesy.
No holds
And I
barred.
think Batista, I mean, if you look at him in Guardians, if you look at him in the James Bond movie he was in, if you look at him in Glass Onion, I mean, really
Yeah.
every performance you find him in, Blade Runner 2049, he shows variations of characters and he plays them all very well.
Yeah. I think the new M. Night Shyamalan movie looks awful, but I'm curious to see how he is in Knock at the Cab. Knock at the Cab. I don't know. It's the trailer
Never
where
has a
they just keep
sentence been
saying,
more
make a
correct in
choice, make a choice,
perpetuity.
make a choice. What
Like,
do you mean?
the new M. Night Shyamalan movie looks awful. Like, I mean,
Oh,
they kind of all.
I know.
They
I'm
kind of
really like
all.
breaking ground on that one.
Yeah, I mean, but I'm saying that sentence is valid in perpetuity. Like, it's pretty much he comes out with a cool one every so often, but for the overwhelming majority
He
of them,
makes me
they're very-
mad.
Yeah, for
He
sure.
upsets me.
Well, look, there's more Mrs. White in minute 24.
Yeah.
Which I feel like we could get into. I don't know. Did we miss anything in this one that we didn't cover?
I don't think so, but I do want to say something that's slightly off topic, but more related to the podcast.
Okay.
We okay? Today, I discovered on Instagram on my phone that there's a whole nother section of messages that you have to approve to read. And I never
Yes.
knew that. And I didn't realize I've been getting messages for about a year on the Clue documentary Instagram page. And so I've been scrolling back, going through them all today, going, what a jerk, because I'm not responding. But there were comments, and I don't know if you get them. I certainly haven't. Comments about this very podcast, which is great because I'll be honest, you live in podcast world. You do like 32 podcasts. I do this, and for me, it's we talk, and then I wait for you to text me and say, "Are you available again?" And we do it again. So I forget that that somebody might be listening to our foolishness. But these particular messages, and there were a couple of them. If we have a greatest hits moment or a best of version of Clue the Movie podcast, there's one thing we did that people thought was great and commented and complimented and really liked. We were in this scenario. Can you imagine what it is?
I mean, is it the big reveal or is it our big discovery?
It's blocking the cook from Mrs. Peacock.
Yeah.
I guess
Awesome.
we must have been, and I haven't listened back to it, so I don't remember. I remember being excited, but we must have sounded like little kids or something like that because the joy apparently that comes through us as we've made this silly discovery real time. Like we're now friends with these people because our excitement obviously came through, and it was very genuine. Everybody, just so you know, that was like the highlight for me as well. So the fact that some of you have picked up on it and responded, and so I emailed back to those people today and said, "Hey, I'm dumb, and just found your message from months ago today." So I figured out how to look at those now. So if anybody wants to send messages through Clue Documentary on Instagram, I will read them now in real time.
You're available to do them. Yes. Wow.
Sure.
You know, I will say, I mean, you're right. I've done a lot of podcasts in my day, but I don't think I've ever had a moment like that to where I was so excited over finding something that I guess that we being people who've watched this movie forever have never seen before. Like I was legitimately thrilled.
Yeah, and it's so smart and obvious, and it was exciting because we hadn't noticed it, and it was exciting because we should have noticed it, but no one's ever talked about it, and it's only because we're picking it apart this way that you would spend 20 minutes talking about that 60 seconds of movie that we found it. So I recommend everybody watch your favorite movie 1 minute at a time, talk about it with a friend for 20 minutes, and then pick up the next one. And then let everybody else listen.
Then let other people listen. I will say we've gotten some really great I've gotten some great messages about this show from people on Twitter and places like that. But you know what? One thing that we haven't done yet on this show, and I think before we wrap up this minute, we should at least contemplate it, is like for how everyone has like the name of the group of people who appreciate their work or whatever. So like for instance, in Back to the Future, the podcast, I call all the listeners, including myself, the Pinheads, right? Like
the band, yeah.
Yes. I don't know. What do we call people who like Clue the Movie podcast? This is a tough one.
The Suspects.
The Suspects aren't bad.
The Suspects is good, or
The Bodies was the first thing that popped in my
mind. Bodies with two D's.
Yes.
That's pretty good. The Somebodies.
The Somebodies. That actually might be it. The Somebodies.
Something body. And if you have an idea, you can message me because I'll read it today.
You can message Jeff on the Instagram page. No problem. Well, I think that we've done it for Clue the Movie podcast number 23, minute 23, and we'll be back with minute 24, where we will continue examining the blackmail of our 6 game piece characters. You can find out more about Jeff at cluedoc.com. You can find out about me at theboatbradgilmore.com. And we'll be back with minute 24 of Clue the Movie podcast.